Hello, my name is Courtney Peterson, and this is my presentation on magic and witchcraft in the Greek and Roman times. First off, some key terms and points that I'd like to bring up before starting is magico is what magic is referred to in Greek. This word is relating to the Greek word magi, which originally was a priestly group serving Medes and the Persians. A lot of what is written about Greek and Roman magic and witchcraft is written amongst literature of Egyptian, Jewish, and Christian retellings of magic. To begin, we'll start off by talking about different objects that were used in different rituals and different types of magic. A number of different objects are seen to be used in rituals in the Greco-Roman world. These objects were used to mediate divine powers in hopes to have a successful ritual and outcome. They believed that with these different objects and gifts to the gods, they would be able to sway their vote in their favor and have the gods on their sides to perform these different actions/requests. These different objects were seen to be popular magical objects such as amulets, which are usually inscribed with something to be used as protection from illness, for example, as well as witchcraft, which could include voodoo dolls, the little bags, that kind of thing. Occultism, curse tablets, magical gems or crystals, as we call them, and magical bowls. They also utilized magical handbooks and binding spells during rituals as an aid. Interestingly, the Greeks believed that in the magic of substitution, if a person or thing is the purpose of a spell, they can be substituted out by their image or a piece of that person. So an image would be like a sculpture or a picture that they could use to substitute their actual being. They can also use a lock of hair, a piece of garment, fingernails, that kind of thing. A lot of witchcraft and magic that is used is said to speak to people's most basic desires, hopes, and fears, and hopes that with a peace offering during ritual, the gods would answer. A lot of Greek magical texts were used in the protection of an individual against the evil eye, sorcery, and magic. There were also magical curse tablets that were usually made of lead and alloys, so that an inscription could be made. But curses can also be made upon gemstone, limestone, papyrus, and wax. An example of the way a curse could be written was at the bottom of a ceramic bowl. Once written on one of these forms, they needed to have the ability to be rolled, folded, or pierced with a nail to symbolize the binding of the curse. Curse tablets were strategically placed in the homes of the victims, bodies of water, different places on land like a forest, or in coffins. The hope of these placings was that the people being cursed would not be able to find the curse and break the spell. Another source, which I cited later on, Magic and Rituals, detailed how sometimes these curse tablets were thrown in a grave believed to house Pluto, Hermes, Kor, and the untimely dead. The first three obviously being Greek Roman gods. These curses often took on prayers to the gods to act against the intended victims. A little more morbid, but when someone was trying to use a binding curse on another human being, the one being cursed needed to be nailed down or bound and powerless in order for the curse to work. These binding spells were most popularly seen in Athens in the 4th century BCE. Witchcraft and magic can also be seen in the Roman society, who utilize magic as deception. One passage states they utilize amulets of frog carcass minus the nails, wrapped in roseate cloth to cure fever. For the most part, though, magic was condemned by many Roman emperors such as Augustus. When it was written, amulets and inscriptions were written in bowls and were used for medicinal uses as well as to protect individuals and families from evil. The three main evils for the Romans were seen to be the evil eye, Lilith, and Bagdanon. I don't think I said the last one right. Bagdanon. If we were to, this is a example of kind of like a inscription written on, I think it's a piece of cloth, but it's really old, so you can't really tell. And it's written in Greek, so you can't really tell what it's saying, but this is a message from Lady Santorina to the god Mercury about a lost linen cloth. So I think that a lot of when people are practicing magic, it can be like really small things like this, or really like large things like cursing somebody and that kind of thing, but it has kind of a purpose in everyday life for them, which is really interesting. If we turn back to the Greek Empire, there was a goddess of magic, witchcraft. There are goddesses of magic, witchcraft, and healing. Hecate was seen to be the goddess of magic, witchcraft, and night. She is depicted on coins of Stratonicea, which is Stratonikia. I forgot to add that to the slide. There is a temple of Hecate at Lagina in Caria. She is seen as a little more of a dark figure, being associated with the creation of the hellhounds and of a ghostly appearance, sometimes with 1 or 3 faces. She is often depicted as wearing polos, which back then was a divine headdress, and holding torches, a sword, snakes, flowers, pomegranates, which I find really interesting because it kind of connects back with the story of Persephone with like Hades, the underworld, pomegranates, that kind of thing, which is really interesting that it kind of all interconnects. She is associated with being the granddaughter of Phoebe and Coos, daughter of Perseus and Asteria. There are very few who actually worship her in particular, and not very many outright cults and places she is specifically worshipped. She does have a lot of like more private cults, which if we refer back to one of the other theorists, Durkheim, we can see that when we're talking about magic and that kind of thing, it's kind of like more solitary and like closed off society. So it's not going to be like worshippers of like Zeus where they're kind of like outright. I think that it's more like personal and private matters. Which is why she doesn't have as many like outright cults and worshiping places. Though she does have a really big following in classical Athens, and that's probably, along with Lagina, one of the only places that you will see like worshiping stations for her. Artemis and Isis are also mentioned as being healing and magic type goddesses, but they are discussed in some other people's presentations, so I didn't want to hit too hard on them, and they're kind of like smaller, whereas Hecate is the main source. There's not very many pictures that I could find of just Hecate. Sometimes it's Hecate and her daughters, but this was really pretty and like really spoke to me. So if you look at the left of your screen, there's kind of a blurry image of almost 3 heads and then arms raised with like 3 legs. That is used to symbolize Hecate. And then next to her is going to be Pluto and Isis, who, I mean, I've talked about throughout the last few bits of the presentation, and we can tell that they are also important to witchcraft. But this is kind of like an inscription of those 3 figures. We will now touch on Greek and Roman popular sorcerers, also known as shaman. One being Pythagoras. He is kind of named throughout a lot of different tales, and I couldn't really depict if it was different people or if it's the same man. I think that it is different people just because we have in the past talked about how a lot of like these names are kind of like surnames or like family names, and they have like nicknames. I couldn't find any like nicknames for these people, but to begin, we're going to start with Pythagoras. So the story of Pythagoras was that he built a tunnel in Italy that is said to go down to the underworld. He had his mother wait at the top and write down any details that happened while he was in the hole. So he kind of like told her all that, went down into the hole, and that was kind of it for a little bit. His mother did sit there and inscribe everything with like dates and times that they used. And then eventually Pythagoras emerged. He was emaciated and skeletal-like. He said that he had met Hades and was down in the underworld, and he went to an assembly of people and like told them his journey and like everything that he had seen and gone through while he was down there. And they could see that he was very like skeletal, like kind of like you would expect from somebody just coming back from the underworld. After that, he was seen as like a divine figure because they thought that like if he could come back, like he must be powerful and like divine. So a lot of people were trying to learn from him, giving him their wives and such, all for that little piece of knowledge that they could gain from him. Another popular sorcerer was Aristeus. I really like the story. It just kind of details how he traveled to another like location and told them that he was possessed by Apollo and like he wanted like the power and that kind of thing, and he wanted people to like believe him, that he himself was possessed by Apollo. These two are just like two small stories that I found really interesting, but there are a ton if you look up like Greek sorcerers. There was less so on like Roman sorcerers, but these two really spoke to me, so you could find tons of different stories of different divine like sorcerers happening, and that kind of thing. Lastly, we will touch on one last area of witchcraft, which is ghost. This was probably my favorite piece of the puzzle. I really liked how we could connect this to like even modern day. And I didn't really think about it as witchcraft until now, but it kind of makes sense that it's like divine and like otherworldly or supernatural, which is kind of like what encompasses magic. So there are 4 main categories of ghost set by the Greeks. There are people who die of violent deaths, people who die of untimely deaths, those who die before marriage. This one was super interesting because it did depict both male and female ghosts who die before marriage, but it was said that like the females are a lot more kind of sour because they didn't get their marriage and they didn't get like the ideal life. So that's why they come back as ghosts and like haunt. And then lastly, those who die but are never buried. These people who came back as ghosts were often very bitter and were people who were cheated out of their livelihood and stay back to haunt the lands. Interestingly, the untimely death also means anyone. Oops, sorry. A common theme that we can see throughout these types of ghosts is that they all have a reason to be bitter and like stay back. So like a lot of like the violent deaths are people who die during battle and like didn't get to live out their life and like live out their legacy. So they come back because they're a little bitter and want to haunt. And then one really interesting story that I found was the story of a witch who sends a ghost of a dead woman to accomplish murder. So for this one, a older woman, not necessarily a witch, goes and finds an older like witch to help her out. She begs, prays to her, pleads, gives her tons of gifts, all in hopes that this witch will help her accomplish something that she really wants. So the lady who goes to seek out the witch either wants to pacify and reconcile with her husband after like a major argument, or if the husband will not be pacified and will not reconcile, she wants the husband to die a violent death. So this woman seeks out a witch begs, pleads, prays to her, gives her tons of gifts, and the witch goes and sends a ghost of like another woman. So this woman is depicted as skeletal, like very pale and gray and like bony with gray hair matted from ashes. She sends her to the husband, and after the husband cannot be pacified, the ghost then goes and makes a noose and hangs the husband, killing him violently. And then after the husband is dead, the ghost evaporates, and a bunch of workers rush, who later on come banging on the husband's door trying to get him to open, but he won't, obviously, because he's dead. So they're banging, trying to get him to open the door. They finally get the door open and see their master of sorts, because they're all workers, hanging by a noose, dead. So it kind of throws everybody into hysterics. The stepmom really isn't mentioned again until the end. But then after the daughter of the husband finds out that her father has died, she is very obviously upset and cries herself to sleep. While she's asleep, her father comes back as a ghost apparition and tells her that the stepmother sent the witch and the ghost to kill him, and he still has like the hanging noose around his neck, and so he still has the hanging noose around his neck, and she learns that like her stepmother was the one who used sorcery and like had also been an adulteress and sent somebody to kill her father. And so that's kind of how the story ends, which doesn't really sum up anything, but that's kind of what we get. But it shows that like one ghost and witches go like hand in hand, and like that both of them have like magic relations. So this is my presentation on witchcraft and magic. I hope that you found it as interesting as I did. I'm sure that there are hundreds of other things to cover, but this was like the most prominent things that I found interesting that I wanted to share with you guys. This is my works cited page. You can go back and like reference anything. If you wanted to look back at like more ghost and like witchcraft sorcerers kind of thing, that's going to be the Ogden Daniels Magic, Witchcraft, and Ghost in the Greek and Roman World, a source book. This one has tons of different sources and things to look through, different stories and like passages about witches, witchcraft, and it does separate it into like Roman and Greek times, which is really helpful. And then I'm also going to attach a video, hopefully on Hecate, that you guys can watch in addition. She's super interesting, and that is it for me. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.